Hey everyone, thanks for coming. Great to see so many of you in here, although I'm sure there's more to come. So my name's Richard, I'm in the Sheffield Adult Autism and Neurodevelopmental Service, and we've been putting on, the psychology department mainly, the Sheffield Autism Research Lab, been putting on this series of seminars with a bit of our help. And this is our fifth, maybe? Yeah. Fifth. Where we have Alison, who's a lady who was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome by myself back in, was it early 2012? I was trying to think. And she's come here to talk about her experiences as someone with Asperger's, and specifically a woman with Asperger's. So, yeah, I'll hand it over to Alison now.
Thank you. I'm going to stand behind here, mostly because I'm extremely nervous and it will keep me upright. So, hello everyone, and crikey, that's loud. Welcome and thank you for coming, really appreciate it. So there is a lot of information around the facts and the figures of what it is to be Asperger Syndrome. I will term it AS probably through most of the way through the talk. I do refer to it as AS or being Aspie. I hope that's okay with everybody else. But what I'd like to do today is share my personal experiences of having AS for all of my life and not knowing a thing about that. Knowing there's something wrong, knowing that I wasn't getting it right, but not knowing how. And certainly for most of my life not having the support and the understanding that I now have in my life since my diagnosis. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name's Alison, I'm 47 and I have a daughter and a son and 3 wonderful grandchildren. My son has AS as well, and his son, my little grandson, was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. So it's throughout the family. My daughter is awaiting her assessment appointment, and her daughter, my lovely granddaughter, who's 9 years old, we're having to fight to get her some help and get her some recognition for what she's going through. Because as you may know, women and girls don't present in the same way or quite in the same way as males do and young boys do. So I wanted to speak out about what life's been like for me, because I believe that there are as many women and girls out there as there are boys and men. We're just hiding. We're hiding behind this mask of normality because we're mothers and wives, and we've got to behave in certain ways, and so we put up this wall, we put up this face that says I'm normal, and we also hide, unfortunately, because we're scared. We're scared to come to the doctors with our problems because we've usually been rejected, or we've been told we're depressives, or we've been told we've got a personality disorder, or even schizophrenia because of our traits. And our daughters are struggling at school to get by. They're deeply unhappy, but they don't have the skills that they need to be able to tell us what's going on. And so they internalise their pain and their confusion, and it usually doesn't come out until later on in life, which is sad. So I think it's time that we stopped feeling that we had to hide. I think that, we get our daughters that support that they need and the recognition that they need, but we can't achieve that unless our doctors and our teachers and even our families are able to see what's really going on for us. It's going to take education, and in a small way I hope that this will bring a little light into what it's been like to live my life with AS without knowing it and without that support. So it's important, I think, to note that, like everybody, we've all had different life experiences, and we all have very different personalities. So not all women with AS are going to appear on this screen. This is just my experience of it, just my story, and that's it. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a glass of water, sorry. So to begin at the beginning, and I've called this childhood dreams. Great swathes of my childhood are missing from my memory, and apparently this is quite common with people with autism. But there are things that I remember really, really well. Some of it good. Unfortunately, what I remember the most is the things that people used to comment on and criticise about me or tried to stop me doing, such as my heavy flapping. So I'll go through it a little bit. I don't know if it'll ring any bells for anybody else. So, living in a fantasy world and believing I'd been left with the wrong family. I know it sounds a bit nuts, but it's true. I was a fairy. And I would spend most of my time doing this and being quite happy in my fairy world, you know, where everybody was nice to each other and, you know, and we were all sort of caring, because that's what fairies do, they care. And I did believe I'd been left with the wrong family. I thought that this fairy princess was going to realise her baby was missing and, you know, and come and rescue me. But of course that didn't happen. So I always seemed to get into trouble, despite doing my best. Usually because I said something that I wasn't supposed to say. That I knew an awful lot of big words, didn't know what they meant, and would often fall into that trap of saying something that I shouldn't say. Took everything literally, and I really did take everything literally. I would look at my socks when told to pull them up, but I suppose one of the funniest experiences I had as a child when at school, in primary school, we were taught about vivisection and things like that, and it was my teacher expressed the opinion, which I then took as fact, that all battery farming and killing of animals was all wrong, and we were doing the wrong thing. And I lived in the countryside in a little village outside, which was a lovely battery hen farm. So taking this in my head and being the kind of person that thought you'd got to go and stand up for these chickens, I marched the village kids up there. I even made banners, so off we all went up to this battery hen farm, and I tried to set the chickens free. And of course caused thousands of pounds worth of damage to the farm while I was there. And got into lots of trouble, but it would never have occurred to me to think that's just somebody's opinion. That was what the teacher said. That must be right. I need to go and do something about this. So as AS girls, you know, we're very caring. We care an awful lot. And something like that, you know, I couldn't watch the news without getting into hysterics at watching the news because I was so upset by what was going on in the world. But yes, took everything literally. And that was the first time I got arrested. So, lack of friendships, but didn't mind, only wanted to play my games by my rules. One of the things my little sister complained about when we were kids was I had to be teacher and they had to be students. And they had to do exactly everything I said, otherwise I wasn't playing. And it makes me laugh remembering that because, bless her, my daughter's just the same, stomping off upstairs as a kid because she didn't win. But yeah, it is very much that we are very insular, I suppose, and we do just want to do what we want to do, and we don't get that actually it's a give and take. Not when we're very young, we don't. So yeah, by my rules. Beginning to realise I was different, but I didn't understand how. All the kids would be playing, and I'd be sat up on some bank with my daisy chains or my books. And I used to watch the other kids playing. And I didn't really ever think, oh yeah, I want to join in. Not when I was little. That came later on. And I knew that I just wasn't like them, but I suppose this whole fairy fantasy and the fact that, that you know, I wasn't actually supposed to be in that world kind of explained it to me. That's what I thought. That's why I'm the way I am. So all of this put us into therapy as a family, which wasn't very pleasant, I have to say, and nobody could figure out what the heck was wrong with me, why I went off and did my own things, why I wasn't playing nicely with my sisters, why I wasn't making friends at school. And that's sort of where therapy began. It didn't do any good, let me tell you, at all. I feel like I'm rushing through this. If anybody's got any questions, please just pop your hand up. I'll be happy to answer them if I can. So moving on. And I called this, when it comes up, oh yeah, what people said about me at the time. So I was nicknamed the fairy elephant because I flapped my hands and I walked on my tiptoes but crashed into everything that's in sight. I still do it. Away with the fairies, because I was always in my own head all day dreaming. Back in the day when teachers could hit you, that blackboard rubber always came flying at my head because I would be looking out of the window and I just wasn't in school. I was everywhere but where I was. She's a loner, or she expects too much when interacting with other children. I remember once when a little girl at school said she was my friend, that I went home in hysterics one day because she was playing with other people. Couldn't get my head around that. How can she be my friend and then not stay with me? Why is she over there playing with them? Didn't make any sense to me. So that's what they said about me. You can't believe her, she's a fantasist. I've put this one in here because we do have this fantasy world, and I see it in my grandson now, you know, with these dinosaurs, and everything's a dinosaur, and I'm a dinosaur, I'm Big Al, or Nanny Allosaurus. And I see it, you know, in him, and I see it in my little granddaughter, where we are enveloped in this fantasy world, and because we say things about this fantasy world, we get a reputation as a liar, which is really, really painful, because we're not lying. We see those fairies, even if you don't. So, but yeah, that was, I think, as I was growing up as a kid, when I did have something to report, when things were upsetting me, I wasn't believed because of this fantasy life that I had going on. We'll just keep stopping, I hope that's okay. So, I've called these teen nightmares because this is where the pain really starts for most of us, I think. It's not a happy time, and I suspect that for anyone with AS who doesn't have the help that they need, that this is probably a really bad time in their lives. We haven't learned the basics of how to conduct relationships, and we suffer the rejection because of that. We don't know there are any rules, so we just keep breaking them. We have no common sense, and I think that's something that's often said, really bright but no common sense. We put ourselves in danger because of that. We go off with people we shouldn't go off with. You know, we agree to do things we shouldn't be agreeing to do. And by the end of school, for me, definitely, I was quite depressed because we know we're not liked, and we know we're not accepted, and we know we don't fit in. Don't have the answers for those, but we know it. So, as I hit my teens, I realised I was not the same as others. I'd got rid of the fairy fantasy world that I lived in, and it hit me that everything I saw was behind this glass wall. It's real, that glass wall. It's something that stands between me and most people as I was growing up. But again, you don't have those answers. You just know that you can't break through it, that you can't reach other people and they can't reach you. Bullied. I think this is a very common thing for most kids. But for us, it's worse because of the sorts of things that people say about us. And you don't have the ability to respond in any kind of appropriate way. Every attack results in you crashing on the floor. And it doesn't matter that somebody might say, oh, they're just. It's devastating, absolutely devastating. Because we already know we're a bit different. So psychological intervention. So I was sent for tests, and I remember going up to a place at Crooks when I was 14, and they sent me up for these tests. And you know when they do those ink blot things, I'm sure perhaps in the psychology department, yeah, ink blot is not the right answer. It doesn't matter that they all look the same to you, and it doesn't matter, ink blot is not the right answer. So at the end of all of those psychological tests, I was told that my IQ was quite high and there was nothing wrong with me. Great. So all those problems I was having, they were all in my head. And the depression and the negative coping strategies as you move out of school, that's when those things happen, because you can actually get into a pub by now. So the drinking started as a coping mechanism. Fighting that anger, that anxiety that you've been feeling when you've had a few and you're out for the night and somebody starts, you end up in a fist fight with them. Don't know why it would happen, it certainly wouldn't happen now, but then it did. Your immediate response to that overloaded environment of being in a pub, I imagine now, I don't go anywhere near them, but then you want to be part of that group, so you're out there drinking with your mates. And finally those suicide attempts, between the sort of ages of 16 and 20, I probably had about 8 or 9 goes at that. And if it wasn't for some of the people around me, then I wouldn't be here now, but I am. I hear that a lot when I look online, when I read about women with AS, that suicide seems like, when you've had this going on for 16, 18 years, like the only answer. You have no value in yourself because nobody else is seeing the value in you either. And it's really sad, and if I had one wish when people look at this is that they rethink that, you know, and go for that help. So, psychiatric intervention. So every time I tried to commit suicide, I would end up in the psychiatric unit, where they would tell me there was nothing wrong with me, I was just a very angry person. Which you can understand, in as much as autism wasn't, I'm going back to the sort of early 80s here, autism wasn't as well known as it is now. It certainly, I don't think, was diagnosed in women. So to them, I was just angry. And that stops you then being able to go for help when you need that help. All that criticism leads to self-hatred. And I think for anybody, if you've gone through that negative experience, then you are going to hate yourself because everybody else appears to. So that's why I call them the teen nightmares. The good news is it doesn't end like that. Anybody want to ask anything? Everybody okay? Yeah?
I just asked, did you meet anybody at this point? You said you went out for drinks sometimes with your mates. Did you manage to meet anybody who you've formed some sort of a friendship with, who, because some of the teenagers that we see, once they get to the teenage years, they tend to meet other people who are quite similar to them, and certainly when they go to university they do, which is great. It's just getting to that point, isn't it? Did you have anyone at that point?
There were girlfriends from school. They were the geeks, the SWATs, as we used to call them. But when I've spoken to them as an adult later on and talked about things with them, they were actually scared of me. and felt that they could not be my friend. I mean, I am a very gregarious person anyway, regardless of the AS, and I am an extrovert, and I am loud, and I am a fighter, just not in the same way anymore. So there was even within that small group of people that I used to go out drinking with, there was a lot of bad feeling, I think, that I wasn't picking up at the time because I was drunk. And only one of those friends from school lasted any years beyond that at all. As I said, this comes from not knowing, you know. If I'd have been able to say to them, the reason I can't cope with all that noise and the reason I have to get drunk to get out of there, that may have changed things, but I didn't have that knowledge. I only know I needed to drink in order to get me out of the house, in order to socialise. So yeah, it was a pretty bad time. But I'd like to move on if I can, unless there's anything else. So what people were saying about me, that I was snobbish and aloof, and I was, I suppose, that's how it could have come across. Quite easily come across. Selfish or bossy. There are some people that would still say I'm bossy. But I think it is that misconception of because I needed to control what was happening, that it could easily have come across like that. You know, when I read about AS now, and people describe it as being self-centered rather than selfish, and I think that's a better way of understanding it. We have control issues because we don't deal very well with the environment. But I suppose as a teenager, what's that going to look like to people that don't know? It's going to appear bossy, isn't it? Intelligent but no common sense, yeah. Absolutely none, sorry. Used to get into all sorts of trouble. Like I say, go off with people I shouldn't go off with and do things I shouldn't do. Whilst being able to recite medieval history, dates, times, you know, that sort of thing, but yeah, no common sense at all. What does she look like? Yeah, I used to get that a lot. And the reason I put that in there is because I don't think that, along with everything else, that we have an idea that you're supposed to dress in a certain way and have your hair a certain way or wear your makeup a certain way, and no. So I used to go down the thrift shop or the second-hand shops, buy the biggest pair of curtains I could find and sew me a dress, and then I would go out in it. I loved all of that. I loved making things and creating things. But yeah, I remember once my mother, you know, I was supposed to be meeting her to go off into town one day, and she ran. She actually ran away when she saw me. Because I was covered from head to foot, including the lovely hat I'd made in holly hobby curtains. So, bless her. Can't believe you said that. Yeah, people still say that about me. I think the truth apparently is not a good thing for everybody, and I would often state the obvious. So yeah, you've got a booger up your nose and you need to get it out, and yeah, your bum does look big in that. Sometimes those things, although we laugh about them now, you know, are really offensive to people and they just don't get it, and neither did I. I just didn't get that that was not the right thing to say. She worries too much. People that knew me then used to say to me, we're going to put that on your gravestone. She worried herself into that hole because I worried about everything, and I think anxiety for anyone with AS is a big issue. You probably saw the state of me before I got up here. It's huge, and I did worry about everything. And this one, it's like watching someone run around on the edge of a cliff. A friend of mine's girlfriend, who was a psychiatric nurse, told me this, and I guess that was a little trigger in my brain that I was behaving in a dangerous way, that I needed somebody to explain it like that for me to see it, for me to be able to realise that at any moment I could fall off. That's what it looked like to other people, because I was running around so desperately trying to be okay and wasn't. Has anybody got any questions about those at all? Anybody? Comments?
How do you know what people say about you if you don't really?
Because they tell me to my face.
Sorry?
They tell me to my face.
Do they?
I suppose what's good for the goose is good for the gander, yeah. Yeah, that's what people tell me. So after that sort of horrible period of childhood and teenage years, I then decided, mostly because of that comment, excuse me a moment, that I needed some help and that I really needed to sort things out. I don't know what happened to that bit of this behaviour. So, Roaring Twenties. I called it the Roaring Twenties because this is when I started to cry, and I don't think I stopped for a decade. Deeply depressed by this time, but because of my experiences as a teenager, I was fearful of any kind of psychiatric services or doctors, and felt completely unable to ask for help. No self-esteem at all, really didn't have, and a string of unsuitable mates who had their own issues. So my girlfriends would say to me, you know, if there's 100 men in the pub and only one of them's got some serious issues, you find him, you will find him. And it's true, I did. I found every drunk, every person that had real deep emotional issues. And I spent my 20s, because I think I wanted what everybody else had. I wanted a boyfriend that lasted more than 2 minutes. And I was prepared to do anything to get that. And it never occurred to me to think, is that person the right person for you to be committing that to? It never entered my head, and you do just one after the other. That sounds awful, doesn't it? That's not good. Really isn't. Don't do touching. So I did get married when I was in my early 20s, but I was completely unable to cope with that married life. You know, the idea that somebody else was now in control because he was a very male. No, that wasn't going to work for me. Him telling me what time things needed to be done, no. And being a mother, unfortunately, when my kids were very little, as painful as it is to say, I ended up leaving. And I think when I watch Jeremy Kyle and I see this poor girl on there who's left her kids, I think I know why. I think I do know why. I mean, I got them back and you know, and fixed it, but yeah, at the time when I was in my early 20s, just all those things that people just easily move into, hadn't got a clue what I was doing, had no role models, had no help, too frightened to go and ask for help, and so, you know, life once again fell apart. So towards my mid-20s, I began to seek and commit to therapy in earnest, because by now every bit of my life is on the floor. I lose job after job, getting divorced, my children are living with their dad. It's horrible. And I think that drove me into fixing whatever was wrong with me. And when I do something, I do it. So I'm going to move on, unless anybody's got any questions about that sort of period. I know that some of this might seem like you're sat there going, oh my God, but it is how it was, and without help,
Can I just ask what you meant by you had no role models at that time? Do you mean your own
I
parents
didn't
or
have
family?
parents at all. I ended up in care. I come from a very large family, all of which either ended up in care or the prison system. But so I left my parents as a young teen, ended up in care. And that in itself may sound awful, but actually care was one of those places where dinner was at a certain time. Bedtime was a certain time. I knew where my stuff was. Nobody else could touch my stuff. And actually it was a very calming influence, but I certainly didn't have a mum who could teach me how to be a mum. My mum left us when I was 3. She left 8 of us at home. So I'd grown up without a mother, so I hadn't got any mother role models. And because I think we do end up with, because we're quite vulnerable and easily led, we end up surrounding ourselves with people that perhaps in a different life you wouldn't end up with, or wouldn't choose to sort of let into your life and influence it in that way. Another water. So I promise I'm not going to sing, but there's a song, and this really, really reminds me of that time in my life when I decided that whatever was wrong with me I had to fix, because I had to get my kids back and I had to work and support myself, and I had to do all of those things in a way that other people did. So I completely jumped into therapy. And I suppose I was lucky to grow up in the 70s and 80s when expressing yourself and being in therapy was becoming the norm. Some of the therapies I committed to were CBT, transactional analysis, that's an interesting one, anger management, psychoanalysis, and finally I ended up in CAT, or cognitive analytical therapy, and I was in that for nearly 3 years. Just that one in total. I've had about 8 years of therapy during this time. And of course the problem with all of these things is by themselves they don't give you the tools that you need as somebody with AS, because they don't explain why you feel the way you feel. It doesn't, the toolkit that neurotypical people might need isn't the same as we need. And it was never ever recognised in that time that, you know, I may have AS. And actually somebody asked me if I was angry about that, but they didn't know either. They didn't have the knowledge. I don't think that people now have got the knowledge, that the right people, the doctors. I think it's starting, I think it's getting there, but you can't be angry for something somebody didn't know. So no, I wasn't angry about it. But at the end of these therapies, at the end of it, you kind of think, well, that didn't work, and I'm still the same person, and I still don't want you to touch me. And so you kind of just feel more defective. Yes.
There's a thing at the moment about, especially in the psychology department, we're not psychologists, we're the physios and OTs who treat the DCD side of things as well, but there's a big thing at the moment about let's not be over-diagnosing autism and Asperger's. Let's just accept that some people are a little bit quirky, and we worry that you may end up like yourself, that there are benefits to a label and that it's not all negative, because one, it would help you to understand
It's not a label.
So what do you feel about the whole
I'm quite annoyed.
diagnosis? do you think it's beneficial, or
Yeah,
do you think that
absolutely.
psychologists
I mean,
should stop diagnosing?
Certainly, but you know, excuse me, I knew I'd do that. Certainly by the time you come to the end of the presentation, you'll see how useful I think all of this is. My grandson, as I said, he was only 3 when he was up at Reigate and diagnosed. But still there is, even within those services, that, oh, well, shouldn't we, do we want to label him? And the kid is suffering, you know. Get the help, absolutely diagnose, absolutely. What people choose as adults to do with that diagnosis is obviously up to them. But for children, absolutely, because without it, you've got no support at school. Your kid is going to get bullied, because you can mitigate some of that bullying, you know, like everyone in Jamie's class knows he's got autism. Everybody knows that, and we're quite loud and proud about that. So we stand behind Jamie. But if he hadn't have been diagnosed, where does that leave the parents? What if you say, no, there's, you know, nothing like they did with me, there's nothing wrong with your child? I can't even contemplate where his life would lead if without that diagnosis, because he just wouldn't get the support.
Can I ask, what were the main signs that started worrying you about Jamie? And when did you start thinking?
My son has AS, so I've been there myself, but with Jamie, from being tiny, never crawled, never showed any interest in toys. However, if you wheel the pram in with the wheel for hours, he will sit and do that, or he did when he was little. And anything spinning. My ex-husband and I, we bought him a very posh remote control car that he could sit in. It had its own radio, and went out into Hillsborough Park, got him in it for Christmas, you know, as you do. And he spent the entire time in this car watching the wheels go around, not interested in any of the flashing lights. No, we're going to watch the wheel. He was almost tipping out of it, you know. Anything that spun for him, yeah, that was the key trigger. He didn't speak, didn't ask you for anything. He'd come and get your hand, and he'd take you to wherever he wanted you to go. And all of those things for me were alarm bells, and that's how I ended up pushing him. Okay. So getting back to the song. I'm rolling down a well-worn road, and I'm wondering if I'll ever know if I'll be better than I was before when I surfaced through the service door. Don't know if anybody of you know this song, I love it. And it says, I'm on standby, out of order and sort of unaligned, powered down for redesign. And it's poignant to me because this is how I felt. I felt like I had to cut off from the world, commit to therapy, make it all right, and fix myself. And I suppose for me there was that element, well, you know, you didn't have a great childhood, perhaps that's what's wrong with you, perhaps that's messed you up. And it carries on. I'm on standby, and according to the work order that you signed, I'll be down for some time. I was down for about 8 years. I got good at saying I've got to go, and number one at saying I don't know. But from the stories that I've heard, you humans require more words. And that whole song for me, it is really, you know, because that was one of my little tactics. You know, if I didn't know what I was supposed to say, and I've by this time obviously become quite introverted and frightened, yeah, I've got to go, or I don't know, are my go-to phrases, or they were then. But that song just reminds me of that point in my life where I realised that I was really messed up, hadn't got a clue why, and that I needed to shut down, cut everything out of my life and just commit to my kids and this therapy, which is what I did, like I said, for 8 years. So the other me, the perfect you, wasn't enough to just fix myself. I had to be the best self anyone could be. And I don't know whether it is that black and white thinking that jumps in at this point, but it had to be the perfect person, the one that never ever got cross, or the one that, the perfect mother, the perfect wife. And so I started watching everybody and learning from everybody. People watching became the thing. And I put myself through it because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be able to hold down a job because I kept losing them. And I wanted to raise my children without any of my hang-ups as I saw them affecting them. That was really important to me. So I was determined to fix whatever it was that was wrong with me to achieve those goals. So I practiced the advice that I learned through all that therapy, the methods, and self-talked myself into circles. I didn't just rescue my inner child, I sent in the emotional and psychological equivalent of the SAS. I went for it. So I learned everything that I could about people by studying philosophy, history, psychology and sociology to try and work out what was reasonable behaviour and why we do the things we do so that I could learn how to do them. Let me get to, sorry, I've lost my little thing. So philosophy taught me that everyone has their own opinion and that's all. History, I learned that humans make the same mistake over and over and over again. Psychology, I learned that normal is a myth. Sociology, and I learned that at the end of that we actually do need other people. That's what sociology taught me. But after 8 years I did give up, because even though I had rescued my inner child and dealt with my childhood issues, I was still the same. I still hated people pushing me, touching me. I still didn't know what the correct thing was to say when I was in a social group. I haven't got a clue. It didn't give me those answers. It didn't fix what it was supposed to fix, which is a bit sad. However, there are consequences, I think. We'll get on to those. So I spent the years in therapy trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And in the end, I started to pretend I was okay, regardless. That meant cutting everybody out of my life, because you can't have people in your life and keep up that kind of pretense full time. So no husbands, not living with anybody other than my kids. And don't let anyone in, they won't know. I think that was my philosophy at the end of it. You know, if you don't let them in, they're not going to criticise you. They're not going to say, you know, what's going on? What's wrong with you? So I stopped letting people in. I cut people out of my life, and we had, you know, one of the complaints I think that the kids made was that, you know, I didn't teach him how to socialise. I did say to my son, it is a bit like the blind leading the blind, but it must have been hard for them, because in social activities that we did have, they had to be very organised. So people, you know, would bring their kids round the house, but I'd need 2 days to sleep afterwards, and that's really difficult for the kids to understand when they're little. So I kind of got more and more defensive and stopped letting people in. Consequences of putting myself through all that therapy. Felt unable to ever just be myself. Ever. I even stopped doing it at home, because I just felt like those things were wrong and I have to be this perfect person and always appear like that. So that did push people out, so they would try and get close and they could never get close, because I had this wall up, this defence of, it wasn't the glass wall anymore, it was, I think it was the Thames barrier we described it as. So that does keep people away, and if you keep people away, then nobody's going to find out that you're struggling, that you're not everything you seem, that, you know. And it made me fearful of being found out. So, you know, as if anxiety that we've got isn't bad enough, I added a few more drops of it. And it became a really big thing for me. Don't get found out. Just don't, you know, just hide. At the end of it all, though, I did give up on myself and I accepted a half-life, because I couldn't fix it anymore. I'd done everything I could possibly do to fix it, and I felt that my place was only this big, and that's what I had to squeeze into and carry on being. And that's when the medication started. I started taking antidepressants, which I'd always rejected before, because I never wanted to feel different to how I felt in a drug sort of way. And it took me about 10 years to come off of it all. I take stuff now for anxiety. I'll take propranolol, which is a beta blocker, but I'm off the antidepressants. But I was on them for years and years.
Sorry, do you mind?
Not at all.
Do you know what, in terms of kind of coming off the medication, as well as that's sort of a big thing in this world, I guess, in terms of the kind of the way you get the depression and the AS coming together.
Yeah.
But was that coming through kind of diagnosis that's helped you do that consciously?
Absolutely.
Was that
Absolutely.
kind of point rather than it being
and it was almost like, and I had to come off and go back on, because at the time it was like the answers, you know, I have the answers. I know now. I know why I'm the way I am, and I'll be damned if I'm taking any more of this medication.
That's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's some, there's quite a bit of information about how we don't actually produce the right chemicals anyway. So regardless of the life you've had, I think, although somebody else will correct me, I'm sure, that we don't make the right amount of serotonin, or that doesn't get sent across our brains in the right way or something like that. So depression, I think, comes with, and I don't think it's solely related to your experiences. I think there is something chemical going on up there. Is that right? Is it wrong? I don't know. I read it. So you'll be glad to hear it's about to lighten up. So, having had this childhood that I'd had and being separated from my siblings, after sort of almost 30 years of no contact, I found my little sister. And I found her online, and lo and behold, she's CEO of an autism charity. And it's a charity that she began in her living room in response to the fact that both of her children had autism. And it's now quite a huge concern, and you know, they do all the training for Medway services there. She opened a school last year to take in some of the children that were being kicked out of mainstream. So that's what she was doing, and we met up. As I say, it was almost 30 years since I'd seen her last. And I drove to Cambridge, and we met in Cambridge, and it was that proper Jeremy Kyle moment, you know, oh my God, you know, let me look at you. And after a few months of us being in contact, she said to me, "You do know you got Asperger's?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't. I've got this psychological problem." She's like, "No, you're really Asperger." And so I started to look at, again, what AS was for women, because when my son was little, and we went to the doctors with him, they used to call it the cold mother syndrome, which is really, really bad, but that's exactly what they told me. He's like that because you're a cold mother. And I think that was quite common in the 80s for people to say, because again, I don't think there was that understanding that we're now starting to get around autism. But yeah, and everything I'd read, you know, it's very male. If you go online and look at what AS is, it's everything's written in this male sense, and you think, well, I don't do that, I'm not like that, you know, I've grown out of that. And so you dismiss it. But she pointed me at resources that were solely about women with AS, and it really was, whoa. So I met my sister Gaynor, and that's when the relief kicked in. And I remember sitting in the office, and he said, "Well, I can confirm, you know, you've got AS," and I'm like, "You mean I haven't got personality disorder?" And that was like, I knew it. So, you know, big relief. So for the next 18 months, I started reliving mentally my life, and it has taken me that long to go over everything in light of AS, and suddenly everything makes sense, and you're like, it's a huge relief. I can't describe it to you. It's like somebody just gives you your life back, because all those things you thought that people were telling you were slightly crazy to think, they make sense. Everything makes sense. And again, felt able to accept myself for the first time, and that is huge. When you get to 45 and that's the first time in your life you can look in a mirror and see yourself, that is huge. But it brings with it that. So I didn't, I think, feel angry as some people I think do, but I did feel sad. I felt really, really sad. And you have to go through this grieving process in order to put it to bed. And some of that therapy that I'd had in the past, actually, you start taking threads from that to do that, to start picking back up. As I said, it doesn't work in itself for a toolkit, but with that diagnosis and the support you then get afterwards, which has been amazing, you can go through that grieving process and then move forward. Whereas before I was just sad, just all the time sad. The day I got my train, I don't know what sort of time we're on actually. I didn't. Okay.
Perfect.
Oh, crikey. I better crack on. Does anybody have any questions about that other bit? No? Okay, so I don't know, I look a bit mad, but I'm going to tell you my train story. My sister gave me a train. So she told me that I have a train, and it's my train. And I can drive it wherever I want to drive it. I can make it go in whatever direction I want it to go at. And I'm up the front and I'm driving my train. And in the first carriage, I've got those people that care about me, my family, my friends. Other people get on my train and get off, so I'll drive my train to work and I do my day's work and people get on, they get off. But ultimately, I'm in the front and I'm driving it. So again, I was in control for the first time. So I could say to people, can you explain that to me in a different way? And I can ask for the help that I need, finally. So I'm in control of that now. And I felt I understood, and I felt okay to assert my needs and boundaries, and I learned to say no. So all of those people that have been making me feel a bit guilty, for not doing stuff, and I felt I couldn't say no, I learned how to say no. And that's a very powerful tool, I think, for somebody with AS, learning to say no. And I don't think it's something that we get until we're quite a bit older, because we've got this urge to be liked. And I cleared my life of people that negatively impacted on me. And the reason I put this in there, I was watching Dr. Richard Smith's speech about how after diagnosis we can leave our husbands or wives, and after long periods of time, I was with Jason for over 12 years, but I left him. And I think that sort of shocked a few people. But I think if you understand that we are trying to be normal, and if you understand that other people can influence us in a way that's not positive, but by being with them it makes you look normal to everybody else, all of a sudden you don't want to be normal. You really, really don't. You want to be you. And if you're not with somebody who gets that, or is willing to go through that journey with you, then you do need to cut off. And all those add-ons that you put on yourself trying to be normal have to go. And he had to go, bless him, but he did. Work as well. So in terms of being okay to assert my needs and boundaries, I've done awareness training at work, because I had to fight for my adjustments, and I was determined that other people with AS weren't going to have to fight for theirs. So I wanted to get some understanding out there within my workplace, and I did training sessions for other staff, and how to support a colleague with AS at work. And I know that other people with AS have now joined. I work for a government agency, and have now joined work, and they're just getting that. What do you need? Here you go. And that's great. So clearing your life of people, and even though it's messy, standing up for yourself can actually really improve things for other people. And I was able to deal with those problems in a positive way. So I'll give you, for example, I work shifts, so I work nights, and I work days, and I work lates, and I work earlys. So if I've done a 50 or 60 hour week, I can say to my daughter, I can't talk to you tomorrow, I'll talk to you the day after. And there's no question then, she's not going to call. And I can say that to my friends, and they just get that, you know, they know I'm tired, they know I'm overwhelmed with being in a very noisy environment at work, and dealing with that. And when I've done that, that actually I am going to need that day in my pyjamas, and it's okay to say that now, and that's great. And that is it, I think. Yeah.